She was sold at 18 to a widowed rancher with 3 children, yet it was her kindness that would save them all. The deal was struck in silence, sealed with $50 and a slip of paper. Abigail Lane didn't cry when her uncle handed her over like cattle. She just stared at the snow, wondering how a person could vanish so quietly and still be alive. Across from her, Elijah Carter, the man she was to marry, said nothing either. His eyes were gray, his hands calloused, and his heart locked behind years of grief. To him, she was a necessity, a pair of hands for his ranch, and a mother for the children who had forgotten how to laugh. But the prairie had a way of changing hearts. The wind that froze her fingers would test her courage. The silence inside that house would test her soul. And by the time the spring thaw came, Abigail would not just be his wife, she would be the one to breathe life back into a dying family, to stand between loss and redemption, and to show a broken man that love isn't a transaction to be bought, but a mercy to be learned. Wyoming Territory, winter of 1878. The land was a white wilderness, endless drifts of snow swallowing the horizon, fences half buried like forgotten bones. The wind screamed through the cottonwoods and rattled the eaves of the Carter ranch house, an old 2-story structure standing defiantly against the storm. Inside, the air smelled of pine smoke, damp wool, and silence. Abigail Lane stood in the doorway, her small hands gripping the worn handle of a leather satchel, the only thing she owned. Behind her, the wagon that had carried her through the frozen miles rolled away, its sound fading into the wind like a cruel goodbye. She had imagined the West as a place of open skies and second chances. Instead, it felt like punishment wearing a pretty disguise. Across the dim parlor, Elijah Carter leaned against the mantel, coat still dusted with snow. He was 36, broad-shouldered, with a face shaped by weather and grief. His voice, when it finally came, was rough as gravel. "The children are upstairs. You'll meet them at supper. No warmth, no welcome, just duty." Abigail nodded, her throat tight. In the corner of the room sat a wooden cradle, long empty but carefully dusted. A single knitted blanket, tiny pink untouched, lay folded inside. The sight made her chest ache. That night, as the wind clawed at the shutters, Abigail lay awake in the narrow bed of a stranger's house, listening to the cries of a restless child in the next room. She didn't yet know their names or the wounds they carried, but she knew one truth with absolute certainty. This house had forgotten how to love. The first morning came gray and unforgiving. The fire in the stove had died before dawn, and frost crept along the window panes like veins of ice. Abigail rose before the children stirred. She fumbled through the kitchen, her fingers numb as she tried to coax the stubborn stove back to life. The matches snapped, the kettle rattled, and smoke filled the room faster than heat ever could. When Elijah appeared in the doorway, his expression was stone. "You're choking the flu," he muttered, crossing the room in 2 strides. He opened the vent, adjusted the damper, and the smoke thinned. Abigail stepped back, cheeks burning not from the fire. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Don't be sorry," he replied. "Just learn." The words were sharp but not cruel, yet they stung all the same. He left without another glance, his boots thudding across the floorboards, leaving silence in his wake. Later that morning, Abigail tried to speak to the children. The youngest, Sarah, clung to a wooden doll and refused to look up. James, barely 6, hid behind a chair. Thomas, the eldest, stood near the window, his jaw set tight, his resemblance to Elijah uncanny. "We don't need another mama," Thomas said flatly. "We had one." Abigail's breath caught. The doll dropped. "I'm not here to replace her," she whispered. "Then why are you here?" he asked. The question hung heavy in the air, cold and merciless as the Wyoming wind. And for the first time since leaving her uncle's farm, Abigail realized she didn't have an answer. The days that followed bled into one another: snow, chores, silence. Abigail learned quickly, not from instruction but from necessity. She scrubbed until her knuckles bled, fetched water from the frozen pump, and fed the chickens that scattered like wild ghosts each morning. The Carter house ran on habit, not warmth. Every night, Elijah returned from the barns with shoulders heavy from work and a gaze that never lingered long. He ate in silence while the children picked at their supper, and when the clock struck 8, they drifted upstairs without a word. Abigail would sit alone by the fire, her hands folded in her lap, listening to the wood crackle. It was the only sound that seemed alive in the house. But little things began to shift quietly, almost in secret. One morning, after burning another batch of bread, Abigail found a folded scrap of paper pinned near the stove. "Try using the smaller logs first. Easier to keep the heat steady." The handwriting was rough, the ink smudged. She smiled despite herself. The next day, another note appeared. "Sarah likes her porridge with sugar, not salt." Then another. "James hides his toy horse under the stairs when he's scared." Each note was unsigned, yet she knew the hand behind them. Elijah Carter, the man who barely spoke, was teaching her to care for his home without ever saying the words aloud. One afternoon, when the storm quieted and the air softened, she caught sight of him through the kitchen window. He was in the yard, kneeling by a corral post, repairing the fence. The late light brushed against his face, revealing the tired gentleness beneath the rough exterior. He didn't look up, but something in his stillness made her heart ache. That night, Abigail baked small rounds of sweet cornbread and left one on the table before she went to bed. In the morning, the plate was gone. In its place lay a single dried flower from the edge of the pasture. Simple, silent gratitude. Weeks passed, and winter thickened. Abigail grew stronger, leaner, her hands calloused, her resolve ironclad. But the silence still weighed on her. Every time she tried to speak at supper, her words froze halfway out. The children had begun to soften. Sarah even reached for her hand once, but Elijah remained distant, as if chained to something invisible. It was Sarah who fell ill first. The fever came sudden, cruel. Her small body burned hot as the stove, her breath shallow, her cries soft and broken. The doctor from town was trapped miles away by the snow. There was no one else. Abigail refused to panic. She boiled water, crushed dried mint leaves, and soaked cloths to cool the child's brow. She stayed beside Sarah for 2 nights straight, whispering stories she barely remembered, singing lullabies she hadn't known she knew. She held the little girl close, letting her own warmth fight the chill. On the 3rd night, long past midnight, Abigail looked up from the bedside and froze. Elijah stood in the doorway. Snow still clung to his coat, his face drawn with worry. He didn't speak, didn't move. He simply watched her cradle his daughter with the tenderness of someone who had never been loved herself. Their eyes met, and in that quiet, something unspoken passed between them, fragile, human, real. He left without a word, but the next morning, Sarah's fever broke. The child blinked, weak but alive, and whispered through cracked lips, "Thank you, Mama Abby." Abigail pressed a trembling kiss to her forehead. That evening, the house felt different, warmer. Even the wind outside seemed to soften, brushing against the walls instead of battering them. Elijah lingered near the table longer than usual. He didn't sit, but his hand hovered near the back of a chair. "You did good," he said quietly. It was the first praise he'd given her. She wanted to answer, but the lump in her throat made words impossible. After that night, the rhythm of the ranch changed. Elijah still spoke little, but he began to notice things: the way Abigail hummed softly when she kneaded dough, the way Sarah leaned into her without fear, the way James laughed again when she chased him through the yard. Even Thomas, ever guarded, started to watch her less like an intruder and more like someone who might stay. Yet where closeness bloomed, fear crept in. Abigail knew too well what it meant to trust and lose. Every glance Elijah gave her stirred something she didn't understand, and every quiet kindness he offered frightened her more than the cold ever could. One night, when the fire burned low and the house slept, she found Elijah outside by the barn, mending a saddle under the lantern light. His breath fogged the air, his face half hidden beneath the brim of his hat. "Why do you stay up so late?" she asked softly. He didn't look up. "Work's never done." "Or maybe," she said, stepping closer, "you just don't like the quiet." He looked at her, then really looked. His gray eyes held both weariness and something far deeper. "Quiet's all I've known for years," he said. "Sometimes it's easier than hearing what's missing." She didn't ask what that was. She already knew. That night, Abigail dreamed of the sound of laughter filling that silent house again. But dreams have a cruel way of testing the heart. A week later, she overheard voices from the barn, Elijah's and another man's, a trader from town. The man's laughter was loud, crude. "That girl you took in young, ain't she? Must make the nights less lonely, huh?" Abigail froze by the door. Elijah's answer came sharp and low. "She's here to keep the house. Nothing more." The trader snorted. "Ain't fooling me. A man don't buy a woman just to wash dishes." "She's not mine to touch," Elijah snapped. "It was a bargain, not a marriage." The words struck like a whip. Abigail backed away, breath trembling. She didn't wait to hear more. That night, she wrote a letter short, neat, final. "If I was only ever a debt paid, let me vanish with the snow." She left it on the kitchen table beside the small silver comb Elijah had repaired for her. Then she stepped into the storm, the wind swallowing her footprints almost as fast as she made them. By dawn, Elijah found the letter. The words blurred beneath melted snow. His face turned pale. Without hesitation, he threw on his coat, mounted his horse, and rode into the white wilderness. The storm was merciless. Snow stung his eyes, froze his breath, blurred the horizon until there was no sky, no ground, only the endless ache of regret. He rode for hours, following faint tracks until the trail vanished. When he finally saw her huddled beneath a broken tree, scarf stiff with frost, he dismounted and ran to her. She looked up weakly, her lips pale. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. "I had to," he rasped. "Because I was wrong." He dropped to his knees in the snow. "I thought I was protecting your name," he said. "Didn't realize I was breaking your heart instead." Abigail's tears froze before they could fall. "I didn't want you to love me," she said softly. "I just wanted to matter." He met her gaze. "You do, more than anything I've ever had left." He lifted her in his arms, carried her to the horse, and rode home through the storm. When they reached the house, the fire was waiting, the children awake and crying. He set her down beside the hearth, wrapped her in blankets, and whispered only one thing: no more silence. That night, for the first time since his wife's death, Elijah prayed, not for forgiveness, but for another chance. Spring came reluctantly to Wyoming, thawing the snow one stubborn inch at a time. The Carter Ranch was reborn in slow-motion fences, reappearing from drifts, the creek running again beneath glassy ice. For the first time in months, laughter echoed faintly through the house. Sarah followed Abigail everywhere now, clutching her skirt as she mixed dough or hung linens in the wind. James raced through the yard with his wooden horse, and even Thomas began to look her in the eye when speaking. Elijah, though still quiet, had softened. He often watched her from the barn doorway, the ghost of a smile flickering at the edge of his mouth. One morning, he saddled 2 horses without a word and called to her from the porch. "Ride with me." Abigail hesitated only a moment before accepting. They rode beyond the hills, where the earth turned soft and green. Elijah led her to a clearing she'd never seen, a field awash with wildflowers, gold and violet under the vast blue sky. Beneath an old oak, a weathered stone stood half hidden among the grass. He stopped there, removed his hat, and said quietly, "My wife, Clara, she rests here." Abigail's breath caught. The stone bore only a few words: beloved wife and mother. No dates, no epitaph, just loss carved into wood and time. Elijah's voice cracked. "She died during the fever. I buried her myself." Abigail knelt beside the grave, tracing the letters with trembling fingers. "You kept it beautiful," she whispered. He shook his head. "No, you did. The moment you stepped into that house." From his coat, he drew out a small velvet pouch. Inside lay a string of pearls, yellowed with age but gleaming softly. "My mother gave these to Clara. I wasn't ready to give them to anyone else until now." Abigail looked up, eyes wide. "I don't have fine words," Elijah said, his voice rough. "But I do have truth. I want you to stay. Not out of debt or duty. Because this home isn't whole without you." "Lef." She couldn't speak. She simply nodded, tears burning her lashes, as he fastened the pearls around her neck. For the first time, they smiled without fear. But happiness on the frontier never stayed long. By midsummer, storms rolled down from the mountains with feral fury. One evening, the sky turned black, and the wind screamed through the valley. Horses reared, lightning split the ridgeline, and the smell of rain came sharp as metal. The children were inside when the first scream tore through the yard, James shouting, "It's Thomas! He's down by the corral!" Abigail dropped the ladle in her hand and ran barefoot into the downpour. She found James near the barn, knees scraped, sobbing. The gate broke, the Mustang kicked at him. Elijah was already on horseback, racing toward the far fence. Abigail followed, skirts heavy with rain. Lightning lit the pasture, and there, in the mud, lay Thomas, still as stone. Elijah leapt off his horse, fell to his knees, and gathered the boy into his arms. "No, no, no, Thomas. Son, open your eyes." His voice cracked open like thunder. Abigail knelt beside them, her heart hammering, hands trembling as she pressed against the wound on the boy's temple. Blood ran down into the rain, washing away before she could even wipe it. They carried him inside. The doctor came 3 hours later, soaked and silent. "He's breathing," the man said, "but if he wakes, it'll be by God's will, not mine." For days, the house held its breath. Sarah prayed by the bedside. James cried himself to sleep each night, clutching his brother's toy horse. Elijah barely ate. He sat by the window, staring out at the gray sky like a man awaiting judgment. Abigail stayed by Thomas's side, refusing to rest. She sang, read, prayed, until her voice broke to whispers. Once, when Elijah entered quietly, he found her asleep in the chair, her hand still resting on the boy's arm. He covered her with a blanket, then knelt beside his son, tears falling freely at last. "I never should have made you work the corral," he murmured. "You're just a boy. I thought I was teaching you strength, but all I gave you was pain." From behind him, Abigail's tired voice came soft but firm. "You didn't break him, Elijah. He saved his brother. That's the kind of strength you taught him." He turned toward her, eyes red. "And what did I teach you?" She held his gaze. "That love doesn't need to speak to be heard." The room fell silent again, except for the slow, fragile rhythm of Thomas's breathing. On the fourth night, as the wind outside hushed and the fire dimmed, Abigail leaned close and whispered, "Thomas, we're all waiting for you. Sarah's been drawing pictures with your name on them. James sleeps with your boots beside his bed. And your father, he's breaking without you, son. Don't make him carry that weight alone." A stillness answered. Then his fingers twitched. Abigail gasped. "Elijah." He was beside her in a heartbeat. Thomas's eyelids fluttered, opened. His gaze was dazed, unfocused. Then, in a thin, raspy voice, he whispered, "Mama, did you cry for me?" Abigail pressed a hand to her mouth as tears spilled freely. She nodded, unable to speak. Elijah staggered backward, gripping the wall as if to keep from collapsing. The boy was alive, and in that single word, "Mama," he had chosen her. When Thomas recovered, the ranch transformed. Laughter returned, cautious but real. The children followed Abigail like sunlight follows morning. Elijah, too, seemed reborn. He worked longer, smiled easier, and every so often reached for her hand without realizing it. A month later, under the same oak where Clara's grave lay, they held a small wedding. No preacher from town, no grand dress, just family, wind, and wildflowers. Elijah spoke first, voice trembling but sure. "I buried my heart here once," he said, "but you found it, and you made it live again." Abigail, tears glistening, answered, "I wasn't looking for a home, but somehow you gave me one." When they kissed, petals swirled through the air, caught in the sunlight like blessings. Sarah clapped. James shouted. Even Thomas, solemn and proud, said, "You look beautiful, Mama." That evening, as the sky blushed gold, a wagon appeared at the edge of the property. An old man climbed down, frail, gray, eyes sunken with shame. Abigail froze. "Herr Uncle." He held his hat in both hands. "I heard tell there was a wedding," he rasped, "and I needed to come, to say I was wrong." Elijah stiffened, stepping protectively closer, but Abigail lifted a hand to stop him. "You sold me," she said quietly, "like I was nothing." He nodded, tears gathering. "And God's made me pay for it every day since. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I remember." For a long moment, the wind was the only sound. Then Abigail stepped forward, placed her palm on his shoulder, and said, "I forgive you, but I won't forget. I can't." "That's fair," he whispered, and turned back toward his wagon. When he was gone, Elijah wrapped his arms around her. "You didn't have to," he murmured. "I did," she replied. "Not for him, for me." Days later, the rains came soft, steady, cleansing. Abigail stood barefoot in the field, the hem of her dress soaked, her hands resting gently over the curve of her belly. Elijah joined her, letting the rain wash over them both. "I lost one good woman to heaven," he said quietly. "But God, in his mercy, gave me another." Abigail looked up at him, eyes full of light. "And this time," she said, "we'll build something that lasts." Together, they planted a young cottonwood beside the oak, a promise in bloom. Its white buds gleamed against the gray sky, fragile but unyielding, like love itself. Summer ripened over the plains like a long exhale after months of holding breath. The meadows around the Carter ranch shimmered with gold, and the sound of life birds, cattle, children's laughter rose again beneath the endless Wyoming sky. Inside the house, sunlight spilled across the kitchen table where Sarah and James sat arguing softly over who got the bigger slice of pie. Abigail, rounded now with the gentle curve of pregnancy, smiled as she kneaded dough. The smell of warm bread mingled with the sweetness of honey and the faint cedar of the old floorboards. For the first time since she'd arrived, the house no longer felt haunted. It felt alive. Elijah entered from the porch, wiping sweat from his brow, his shirt dusted with hay and sunlight. He paused by the doorway, watching her work, the woman who had been sold to him as a burden and had instead become his redemption. "You're glowing," he murmured. She smirked, teasing, "That's just the oven heat." He shook his head. "No, that's hope." He crossed the room and kissed her forehead, lingering there longer than he ever dared before. "I used to think a man only got one life," he said, "one love. But you proved me wrong." Abigail looked up, eyes soft. "We both were wrong about many things, and maybe that's what makes us right now." Zhao. Outside, Thomas was mending a gate with steady hands, his face still carrying the faint scar near his temple. He waved toward the window when he caught her watching. The boy who once shut the world out now smiled easily, a quiet strength learned not from hardship, but from healing. That afternoon, Elijah took the children riding to the north pasture, while Abigail rested by the window, sketching the cottonwood tree they had planted beside Clara's oak. The two trees now stood side by side, roots intertwined beneath the earth, branches reaching toward the same light, one old, one new, like grief and love, existing together without erasing each other. When the riders returned near sunset, the air was thick with gold dust and the sound of hooves. Elijah lifted Sarah from her saddle and spun her once, laughing a deep, unguarded laugh that startled even him. James ran inside, shouting that supper smelled like heaven, and Thomas lingered behind to whisper something to his father. Elijah nodded, smiling. Later, as night fell, Abigail stepped out onto the porch. The moon hung low, and the prairie glowed silver under its light. She heard the door creak behind her and felt Elijah's arms wrap gently around her waist. "Remember when I told you I didn't know how to love right?" he whispered. "I remember," she said softly. He leaned close, breath warm against her ear. "I think I'm finally learning." Abigail turned in his arms and met his gaze. "You didn't learn from me," she said. "You learned from forgiving yourself." They stood there in silence, listening to the wind sweep through the tall grass, carrying with it the sound of a future being built one heartbeat at a time. In the distance, thunder rolled softly, a promise of rain, not a threat. Elijah took her hand and guided it to his chest, his heartbeat strong beneath her palm. "This land," he said, "nearly took everything from me, but it gave you back." "And what will we give it?" she asked. He looked toward the fields, roots, just like those trees, something that'll hold when the storms come again. Abigail smiled faintly. "Then we'll plant more." The first drops began to fall, warm and gentle. Elijah drew her close as the rain thickened, soaking them both. From inside, the children's laughter echoed through the open windows. Sarah's small voice shouted, "Mama, come dance with us." Abigail's laughter joined theirs as she stepped barefoot into the yard, mud squelching beneath her feet. Elijah followed, his laughter deep and free, and together they danced beneath the summer rain, two souls once bound by duty, now joined by choice. As lightning flickered across the far hills, Abigail looked toward the cottonwood and whispered to herself, Even in this wild land, love can bloom. Years passed, and the land remembered. The Carter Ranch grew strong again, rebuilt not from wealth, but from the quiet discipline of love. The cottonwood and the old oak thrived side by side, their branches crossing above the pasture like two hands clasped in eternal peace. Travelers passing through often stopped to rest under their shade, never knowing the stories rooted beneath their feet. Sarah grew into a young woman with her mother's warmth and her father's will. James learned the trade of horse breeding, always gentle, always patient. Thomas took charge of the ranch, broad-shouldered, steady, a man who had learned the meaning of strength from the woman who once saved his life. Abigail watched them all with quiet pride. Her hair silvered with the years, her hands lined with labor and laughter alike. On warm evenings, she still sat on the porch with Elijah, their chairs creaking in rhythm with the wind. The air smelled of sage and rain, and the world felt merciful. Sometimes, Elijah would glance toward the cottonwood and say, "You remember that night you forgave your uncle?" She'd smile softly. "I do." He'd nod. "I think that's when heaven started letting the rain fall again." They didn't speak of pain anymore, not because they'd forgotten, but because they'd made peace with remembering. The past no longer haunted them. It had become the soil from which their life had grown. One morning, as dawn stretched gold over the plains, Abigail whispered to her youngest grandchild sitting on her knee, "Do you know why we planted 2 trees?" The boy shook his head. "Because love doesn't erase what came before," she said, brushing a lock of hair from his brow. "It grows beside it, stronger for having known the storm." The child smiled sleepily, and Elijah's hand found hers, warm and sure. The wind rose across the fields, carrying the scent of wildflowers and the faint echo of laughter long past. The Carter house stood against the horizon, simple, steadfast, alive. And beneath that endless western sky, the lesson endured. No heart is too cold to bloom again. Not in this land, not in this life. Subscribe for more Western love stories, where hearts find hope in the dust.